Hello BookTube, hello friends, welcome to Lizzie Faye Loves Books. I'm Elizabeth, and in this video I'd like to bring you some more of my book club books. Now I've already done a short series about book club on my channel within the last couple of months. In one video I talked about just a discussion of where book club is going and what we can do about book club in a COVID-19 world. And then I did a couple of videos where I talked about the book club books that I'm reading this year in 2020 for book club. And then I noticed that Karen from Kay the Reader had also started doing a short series about book club on her channel, which, by the way, is dangerously close to 1,000 subscribers. I want you to, after this video, go to Kay's channel, or Karen, and subscribe to her channel if you're not already subscribed. She's been on BookTube for 7 years, and she's about 50 people short right now of reaching 1,000 subscribers. So be sure you tell her that I sent you, and be sure to subscribe to her. She has been a host of March Mystery Madness in the past, and she is a really sweet person, and I think you would enjoy her channel, and I want you to check her out. So she was doing a series on book club, and one of the videos that she did was top 20 books that she read for book club that she loved. And I thought, I should look back at all of the book club books that I've read and just maybe come up with my favorites list. So I went back, and I had already kind of started a shelf on my Goodreads of the book club books, and I went back through the list of all the books that we've read in our Literati book club, which we started when our new library facility opened in 2014. And I have made a list of all the books that we've read for that club up through to the end of this year. And I have read all of them but 9. There were 9 in the past that or maybe 8 that I haven't read, and then there's still 1 coming up that I have not read. So that's pretty good. I've missed a few here and there, but I kind of have a goal now, sort of a reading project, that I would like to go ahead and pick back up with that list and finish the ones that, I'd like to read the ones that I missed for whatever reason. So that's that's an aside. So what I want to talk about today is I went back through that list of 78 books. I looked at them by star rating, and I had rated maybe 21 of them 5 stars. But I got to thinking, as I was looking on through the list, there were a couple of others that are so memorable that I decided to call this video my most memorable book club books. And I'm going to do 12. I might give an honorable mention to a couple of others because like I said, I had a lot of 5-star books, and I just want to talk about the ones that are still resonating with me up to this point. Now, a handful of them are ones that I read last year. So, will they still continue to resonate with me on into the future? I don't know. But as of right now, I still think of them, and I think, wow, I'm glad I read that. That was a great book. And so I just want to go through these and talk about them. So as I said, I'm going to focus on 12 books. Now, of these 12, 3 of them I did not give a 5-star rating to. 2 of them I gave a 3-star rating to, and 1 of them I gave a 4-star rating, and then all the others 5 stars. And so they don't even have that in common. What they do have in common, though, which is interesting because I don't really consider myself a historical reader, but all 12 of these are historical books. All of them are historical fiction except 1, and it's a memoir, so by very definition, it's historical. And that's really about the only common denominator. They're all historical. Not all of them are from the United States. There are 2 set in Russia. There is 1 set in Paris. Then I think all of the rest of them are United States. Probably at least half or more are set in the 1900s, but most of those are set in the early 1900s. And then there's a couple in the 1800s, 1 in the 1700s. So there's a couple of them that have dual timelines, and several of them, I'd say about 5 of them, follow a person through their life. So that, I think, I'm just kind of looking at these, trying to analyze my reading and think, okay, what is it about these books that made me love them or remember them or enjoy reading them. And so, I don't know. Apparently, I like historical fiction, although that's not what I read that much of. And honestly, if I had, if someone had said, look at this list of books, pick out the ones you most want to read, a lot of these, most of these, probably wouldn't have been on the list. And yet I'm so glad that I read them. So think about that next time, someone invites you to a book club, because it might take you out of your comfort zone, but you may end up finding your next favorite book. So let's just get started. I think first I will show you the books that I rated 3 stars. Now, the first one is actually listed as a thriller, although it's definitely very historical. It's set in Russia, and let me just give you a little bit of information about each book as far as when it was published, when I read it. A couple of these books I read prior to when I started on Goodreads. I first got on Goodreads in early 2015, so most of them will have a Goodreads review, and I started BookTube in July of 2015, so anything after that I will have talked about on my channel. So by me telling you when I read them, if you want to hear me gushing about them or talking about them in any way, you can go back to that time frame on my channel and find where I talked about them. So let me find my glasses and read my notes. Okay, so this first one, I rated it 3 stars. It was first published in 2008. I read it in January of 2016, and it starts out in 1933. There's the prologue, and then from there, the majority of it takes place 20 years later in 1953. It's set in Russia, and like I said, it's labeled a thriller. The book is called Child 44 by Tom Rob Smith, and let me just tell you, I had a hate-to-love relationship with this book. For at least 3/4 of the book, I hated this so much. I thought it was dry, it was boring, I didn't know what was happening. I really haven't studied much about the history of Russia, and I just couldn't get into it. I was listening to it on audio, and frankly, I just let it play. And I just, kept going. I was like, oh, I'll get through this at some point, hopefully. Now, this was before I had a smartphone, I believe. If I did, I'm pretty sure I listened to this on CD, so I couldn't speed it up. I just had to sludge through it. But let me tell you, once it started to kind of come together and it started to be revealed who the killer was, it was crafted so amazingly. And I mean to tell you, whoa, I was blown away. I was just at the edge of my seat. And then even once it was revealed and then the story kept unfolding, I was like, it was so good. And that was just like the last fourth of it. Now, I think I've heard 1 or 2 other booktubers, at least one other person, say that they DNF'd the book because they just couldn't get through it. And I'm like, oh, you got to stick with it. Really, you just got to stick with it. It's hard in the beginning. It's hard. Like I said, the first 3/4 I thought were just awful. But the payoff is there for sure. Now, would I read this again? I think I might. And if I did, I think I would probably appreciate it more. I would definitely pay more attention to the timeline and the history of things. Although really, the majority of this book, I think, is set in 1953. But I think I know a little bit more now about the Russian history, because there's another book set in Russia that's on this list as well. And I just understand it a little bit more. I paid more attention, I suppose. And I would be going into it already, though. I would know who the killer is, so that would make it not as crazy, that reveal. But I think that it is a book that I would read again. And I have read, this is the first in a trilogy. So even though I said I had a hate-to-love relationship with this book, I went on and I listened to book 2, The Secret Speech, and book 3, Agent 6, and I enjoyed them. I didn't love them, but I didn't hate them either. So anyway, it was, this is a book that I recommended to my husband. He later read it, and I'm just so glad that I read it, because I can't honestly think of any other book that I hated so much in the beginning that had such a fantastic payoff in the end. On another side note, there is a movie by this same name. Don't even bother with that. It really only has the same name. It's got the same character names. But to me, what makes this story so amazing is completely non-existent in the movie. That storyline is not even there, and that's the good part of this book. So, if you've watched that movie and you thought, this is different. This is way better, and this is where you should put your time. So anyway, Child 44 by Tom Rob Smith. And again, I only rated it 3 stars because I hated most of the book, but there is a payoff for sure. Now, the next book I also rated 3 stars, and if I read it again, I might rate it higher, and I'm not really sure why I rated it 4 stars. Maybe because some of the characters are kind of unlikable, and if you know me, I like to read books with likable characters, and that's probably why so many of these others resonated with me as much as they did, because I love great characters. But this is a book also by a male author. Oh, that's what I was going to do. I was going to make a list, or just kind of add up female versus male authors, and it might be about half and half, or there's probably more female, but still a few males. So anyway, this is by Jim Fergus. It's called 1,000 White Women, and this book reads like it's real. In fact, if you don't read the author's notes in the very beginning, you would read through this whole book and think, whoa, this is a real story. But it's kind of grounded in a real fact, in that somewhere back in the 1800s, I think, is it 1875, the Cheyenne Nation asked the U.S. government for 1,000 white women in exchange, I think in exchange for weapons. And it says in here that their thought process being that they're like a matriarchal line society. Did I say that right? I don't know. Where the women's tribe is who the child belongs to. So, in their mind, it was a good compromise, maybe. I don't know. So this takes that fact of that offer, which, as far as we know, the U.S. government did not take them up on that. But this operates on the premise that they did. And we meet this first group of women. There's not 1,000 in this story. We just meet this first group who volunteered out of other less than nice situations, who thought, okay, my life right now is not great. So in order to get me out of this situation, I'm going to try this. And they volunteered to go and live with the Cheyenne. And our main character, May Dodd, is a woman who was put in a mental institution by her family because of who she fell in love with, and her family disagreed with that, so they thought to straighten her out or prevent her from, marrying this person. I can't even remember all the details. They put her in a mental institution. So she ends up volunteering, and she's able to get out because the nurse there at the facility wants to volunteer as well. So the nurse helps her get out, and they go and volunteer to be in this group of women. So the story follows this group of women and their life with the Cheyenne. And it is, I really ought to read this again. That was the other thing about this whole list, is almost all of them I listen to on audio. And I think I retain information better when I read it in print. But when you're reading stuff for book club and you got to get it done by a certain time and everything, I just end up resorting to audio if it's available. So I listen to this on audio, but it is a book that I would read again, and I think I would probably enjoy it just as much and more, probably, just knowing what I know now about the story. There's some really tough things that happen in this book, but it's just such a compelling book. It's very engaging. The characters, some are great, some are interesting, and I just think it's worth reading. So yeah, even though I only rated it 5 stars, I might rate it higher if I read it again, and I thought that it was definitely worth reading. So then the next book is one of the two in this list that I read in print. And this may be available on audio, but at the time when I read this, which I think was in 2014, oh, that's what I didn't tell you, was the information about it. So let me backtrack just a second. So 1,000 White Women was published in 1998. I read it in April of 2015, so I was on Goodreads at the time. And it's set in 1874 to 1875, and it might go into 1876. So that's, it's a pretty short time frame. And yes, that's about it that I wanted to tell you about that one. Okay, so then the next one is the only memoir in the bunch. This is The Glass Castle by Jeannette Walsh. So this is published, or was published in, let me find it on my list, 2005. I read it in February of 2015. It's set probably in the 60s or 70s, based on the author's parents' wedding picture. There is a wedding picture in the front. They married in 1956. So this is the story of Jeanette and her family when they were kids. So I'm going to guess that it was 60s, 70s. That's when the majority of the story takes place. And this is so compelling. It's so good. And I think if I read it again, I might rate it 5 stars. I think why I rated it 4 stars was because I guess somewhere I didn't want anyone to think that I approved of everything that this father did in this family, because I don't. He did some really off-the-wall crazy things and put his kids in danger. And, I don't agree with that. But the book itself is so compelling and so engaging. And it's basically about a family who try to live off the grid. They move around, and they don't wait in any one place long enough for the law to catch up with them. They sort of, I believe, as I recall, they just kind of live as squatters wherever they can find a place to live. And then after the kids grew up and made their own lives, the parents still continued to live as homeless people. And it's just such an interesting story and an interesting way to live, and to realize that some people choose to live that way. It's not only because of bad circumstances. It sometimes is because, I guess in a way it is all bad circumstances, but some people choose to stay in it rather than do what it takes to get out of that circumstance. So thankfully, almost all of the siblings made it out and have, been able to improve their lives and be successful. I believe one of the siblings did not, and I can't even remember now exactly what happened in that situation. But anyway, definitely a great book, and it is one that I would read again. In fact, I would say that of all of these books, that would be another common denominator, is that I would read them again. Most of these that I read on audio, I would like to read them again, but in print, just to absorb them better, I think. So then the next few, including Glass Castle, the next few are going to be the ones that follow a person through their life. So this is a memoir, so of course it follows someone through their life. The next one is one that I read prior to being on Goodreads, and of this list, this one is probably the one that, I don't know, it made me wowed me the least, I guess, if that's a good way to say it. But it's still very compelling, and it's so interesting. And I just really enjoyed the process of listening to it. It's called The Aviator's Wife by Melanie Benjamin, and it's the story of Anne Morrow Lindbergh. And it starts out with Anne as a young person, and it goes through her meeting Lindbergh and their courtship and their life together, the kidnapping of their child, and it talks about her, wanting to write and write that novel, which then turned out to be Gift from the Sea. I believe that was her first book that was published. And I have that on my shelf ever since reading this, I have wanted to read that. I haven't yet, but I want to. So this was just such a fascinating story of the life of this woman and this family. And it's fictionalized. I mean, it's based on a real person and real people, but it's a fictionalized account of their life because we don't know, all the conversations and everything. And I really enjoyed it. I thought that it was a very good book. So this one was published in 2013. I read it probably in 2014. And it starts out in 1927 and then continues on through quite a few years of the life of Amor Lindbergh. Okay, the next one is one of the more recent ones. Now, this is the one that my book club is reading this month, but I read it last month, or last year, for my other book club that meets outside the library. And did I mention that book club at all? I've started this video and restarted it so many times, I can't even remember if I mentioned it. But I'm in a third book club, but we haven't met any this year. It doesn't have anything to do with the library. It was started last year, I guess, early last year, by a couple of ladies that I happen to go to church with. And so it meets either in a restaurant or in homes or whatever. And we just haven't been able to meet this year because of social distancing and everything like that. But anyway, this is a book that we read last year for that club. So I've already read it, but my library book club is reading it this month. And I'm sure most of you are going to be very familiar with it. It is Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. Now, even though this is a fairly recent read for me, I think this is a book that's going to stick with me for a long time. It's the story of Kaya living in the marshes of the North Carolina coast. And as a young child, she is abandoned. Her and her siblings are abandoned by their mother first. And then one by one, all of her siblings leave, leaving her alone with just her father. Eventually, her father disappears, and she has to survive on her own. And I think at that point, she is maybe 12, 13, 14, something like that, maybe even younger. And it's the story of her life on through adulthood, through her entire life. And it's just fantastic. Now, the only complaints I've heard about this book are the scienciness of it. There is a lot about the flora and the fauna and everything, but I enjoyed that a lot. I grew up with a science teacher. My dad was a junior high and high school science teacher. Botany was one of his favorite fields of science, and we would be driving along and he would point out some kind of tree or plant, and then he would proceed to tell me the genus and the species name of it. And I mean, I grew up like that. So that I really enjoyed that part about it, and I just thought it was a fantastic book. So if you haven't read this, if you're one of the 5 people who haven't read this, I recommend that you read it. And if you have read it, then let me know what you thought about it down in the comments. So then the next one was a book that I read, I think, in 2019, maybe early 2019. And this is one, again, that a lot of you have read, but it's so powerful and it's just a fantastic book. It is by Kristin Hannah. It's called The Great Alone. I think this was published in 2018, and I believe that it is set in about 1974, I think is where it starts, with our main character, a young teen, and then it goes on through quite a few years of her life. And it's basically about a family. The dad is suffering from PTSD, and he takes his family off the grid to Alaska. And it's the story of their survival, and surviving not only the Alaskan wilds, but having a father in the house with PTSD who's very unstable. And it's a powerful book. It's very engaging, and I would recommend it if you haven't read it. And then the next one on the list is really the only one here that's set in and around World War II. And we've read quite a few World War II books in our book club, and I think this one is by far my favorite. It is Sarah's Key by Tatiana de Rosnay, and this is a dual timeline book. This one and one other book are in my list of 12 books are dual timelines. I find that's been a kind of a popular thing in the last several years. We have read several books with dual timelines in our library book club, and I enjoy it as long as I can keep up with it because a lot of times I'm listening on audio and I need for them to clearly plainly say on the audio that they're switching gears and going, to this other timeline. But this book is obviously the historical timeline is set in World War II, and it's about a young girl in Paris, and her family are being arrested because they're Jewish, and she quickly hides her brother in a cabinet and locks him in and says, "I'll be back as soon as I can." And then they're taken to a concentration camp. So I'm not going to tell you how that story ends, but it's very compelling. Then there is a modern day storyline where we have someone who is kind of researching and looking up the history and learning about Sarah and her family and what happened to them and all of that. So my camera is giving out. I'm going to pause it for a second and just see what's going on. I want to make sure I don't want this to stop in mid something. So I'm going to pause it and see if I need to delete something or plug it in for a few minutes or whatever. Hang on. Well, it says my phone is at 25% and it's not telling me how much time I have left in my memory, but I just deleted all the other videos on my phone, so I should have enough time to get through this. So the next one is also a dual timeline story, and it is historical. It is set in 1911 and also 2011. Now, the 2011 storyline is about a woman in Manhattan who is remembering 9/11, which happened 10 years prior to that, and her husband was lost in that disaster. So she is she's remembering him. She's kind of coming to some sort of closure with that. And then we also learn about the story in 1911 of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, which also happened in New York. And throughout the story, there is a scarf that ties the two stories together. So without going into a lot more detail, I thought this book was wonderful. It's very compelling. It's heartwarming, heartbreaking, heart-wrenching. It's just everything, all the feels in the heart. And I just thought it was great. This is A Fall of Marigolds by, is it Susan Meissner or Susan Meissner? I'm not sure. But anyway, if you haven't read this, I would recommend it. Then the next one, I don't have a physical copy of. Well, I do have a physical copy, but it's loaned out, and I forgot I had loaned it out. I had to check out about half of these from the library and about half of them I own. So this is one that I own, but it's loaned out. So I have a placeholder here. The book is by Patrick W. Smith, and it is A Land Remembered. Now, off my shelf, this is one of my husband's books. I have another book here by Patrick Smith called Forever Island, and this is also a bind-up of that book with another story called Alapata, and I believe these are both Florida books, although I'm not absolutely certain. Anyway, I didn't want to forget to tell you about A Land Remembered. So, it's by Patrick W. Smith, and it is about 3 generations of early Floridians. It starts out, I believe, in, let me see if I wrote it down. It starts out in 1858, and it goes through 3 generations of a family called the McIvies. And it was originally published in 1984. That's how long it's been around. And it has been voted the most, or the best Florida historical fiction book that there is. It has been voted that several times. It won an award of that nature back when it was first published, and it continues to be touted as the best Florida fiction book out there. And you don't have to be a Floridian to enjoy it. It is very, very good. This is a book that was read by our book club several years ago, and I missed out on it, but last year it was recommended by someone from the 3rd book club that I'm in, and so we made that one of our choices for late last year. So I read that in December of this past year, 2019, and everyone who said this book is great was absolutely right. It's such a good book. It's just fantastic. I would highly recommend it. And like I said, it doesn't matter if you are from Florida or if you're from Alaska, or across the world. I think it's still a very compelling book, and I would highly recommend it. So then the next one is set in the it starts out in the 1700s and then goes into the early 1800s. And this is the only book that I have here that is about slavery or set during a time period and has anything to do with slavery. And I thought this book was so heartbreaking, but just so worth reading. It's called The Kitchen House by Kathleen Grissom. So our library book club read this one in 2018 maybe, or 2017. Hang on, I've got to consult my notes again. We read this one in 2017, and then the next year we read the sequel called Glory Over Everything. And this book was published originally in, oh, I lost my place here, 2010. And it's just so good. It's written from, I think, at least 2 or 3 different perspectives. This one may be written from 2 perspectives, and the sequel from 2 or 3. Anyway, it starts out about a little girl who is coming over with her family on a boat from Ireland to the U.S., and her family dies, so she's orphaned while she's on the boat, and the captain of the boat happens to be a plantation owner in Virginia, and so he takes her in and basically makes her an indentured servant to him, and he gives her over to his slaves that are on the plantation, and he puts the slaves in charge of her care. So she is basically a little white girl who is being brought up as a slave. So you can imagine that the dynamic there will cause some friction later as she gets on, into adulthood. So she has one of the perspectives. And then the lady who is kind of her mother figure, her name is Belle, she is a daughter of the plantation owner. So, but she's one of the slaves. So, I'm losing my train of thought. I should have thought this all through, how I wanted to say this. I don't know. There's 2 perspectives. Both are very compelling. It's just a fantastic book, and it's harsh. It's hard to read, but I think it's a great read, and it's definitely one that I would read again, as well as the sequel. Now, the sequel, called Glory Over Everything, is also kind of an honorable mention on this list, and you wouldn't necessarily have to read this one to read that one, but they're both great. I would recommend them both. Okay, I've got 2 more, and I have saved these 2 till the end because I think these 2 are probably my favorites. Now, this next one, it's the other book that's set in Russia, and I often mention it sometimes if I'm doing a tag. There's a couple of tags. I guess the main one is the mid-year freakout tag. Has one of the questions like, who is your most recent fictional crush? Well, I don't get them very often. In fact, this is really the only one I can think of in adulthood. But the book is A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. This book was so good, and when you see the premise and you see that it's about a man who is on house arrest, who has to live his life in a hotel, you think, well, if he can't go anywhere, how is that interesting? Trust me, it's interesting. It's so good. This book is just fantastic. Now, I think part of the reason I love it so much is because I love a great character, and Count Rostov is awesome. So, if you've never read this, I would totally recommend it. Now, this is one I would read again. I just got this nice physical copy a few months ago, but I was looking through it and thinking, wow, I would not remember how to pronounce some of these things. So I think if I was ever going to read it again, I would still need to have the audiobook in my ear so that I could learn how things are pronounced, because there's a lot of Russian stuff in here. So this takes place in Russia, in Moscow, and the Count Rostov he's under house arrest, and the hotel where he is across from the Kremlin. So he can see what's going on. He can see the comings and goings, and that's part of what makes it interesting. Also, people are allowed to come in and see him. He just can't leave. And it's just very heartwarming. It's just a great book all around. It's just a great book. It was originally published in 2016, so it's not very old. It's set in it starts out in 1922, but it goes through several decades of his life there in the hotel. So it's just great. I highly recommend it. But I would recommend getting the audiobook because there's some hard words in here. And then the last one I want to talk about, I love, because not only is it historical, it's about a time frame that I don't know a lot about. It's early 1900s, but it's set, I believe, in the South, and it's just funny. It's humorous. I mean, there's a lot of all kinds of things going on in the book, but what I remember most about it was just enjoying it so much. And the book is Cold Sassy Tree by Olive Ann Burns. Now, this book was originally published in 1984. So I have two books here that were published in 1984. There was this one and also A Land Remembered. And then the only one published in the 90s, I believe, is... I already forgot which one. Which one was published in the 90s? Oh, 1,000 White Women. All the rest have been published 2000 or later. Hold on one second. Sorry, I hated to stop that there, but Emily needed to walk through. So, this one was originally published in 1984, and it is set in 1906, I believe, is where it starts. It covers, I think, a few years. Let me find it here. Yes, it starts out in 1906, and it's about a young boy and his life and experiences, mainly surrounding his grandfather and his grandfather's life. So when the story opens, you meet the boy and you meet his grandfather, and the grandfather is announcing to his daughters that he's going to get married again. And his wife has been dead, I think, about 3 weeks. So his daughters are about to come unglued because you just don't do that. You know, that dishonors their mother's memory. It's just not done. You know, they're like, what are you doing? But he's going to do it anyway. So the grandfather is just such a great character. And who he marries is a great character. The boy is a great character. It's just awesome. I found this book to be so heartwarming and so fun. The sad thing is that when this author, Olive Ann Burns, was writing a sequel, she passed away. And the book started out okay, but then it kind of goes down a weird path, and then it's not finished. And the editor wrote their notes and what they thought about where it was going. But I think that had the author had time to flesh it all out, I'm hoping that she would have gone a little different direction, because the second book, as much as I hate to say it, I just didn't like where it was going. But this first book, I just thought was fantastic. So of all these books, this one and this one are probably my favorites, but I would definitely recommend any of them to you. So let me know in the comments if you have read any of these books, which ones were your favorites, which ones have been on your radar, maybe that you haven't read and you've been thinking about it. If I've convinced you to read it and you haven't yet, did I say that right? No. If by watching this video I've convinced you to read it, let me know. And then let me know in the future whenever you get a chance to read whichever book it is. So anyway, that's all I have for this video. I just wanted to share with you my most memorable book club books from my library book club. And I hope that you are doing well, and I hope that I will be back soon with another video. So have a great day, read a good book, and God bless you.